I want to respond to Conference Report's video, Conversation is Fundamental, which is itself a response to my video, Rights are Fundamental, on Prostitution and Idiocy. I want to say at the outset that I appreciate the fact that Conference Report responded to some of the principal arguments I made in my video, Rights are Fundamental. His approach differs significantly from the marginal analysis he recently gave to one of my videos named Diagnosing Arguments. More about that marginal analysis later. Conference Report says it's not useful to talk about legalizing prostitution because it's legal in England and other countries. In his recent response to the Peach, Conference Report said that diagnosing the legalization of prostitution was like kindergarten. Well, the Peach and I come from a nation in which it's illegal for people to engage in prostitution in 49 of our 50 states. That means a lot of adults go to jail, acquire criminal records, have their names and faces published in newspapers and websites for engaging in an activity that should be their right. As Conference Report knows, in some countries in which prostitution is technically legal, it is rendered moot by other laws associated with it, as in the case of the much ballyhooed Swedish model. So while there is a kind of idiocy involved in having to discuss a right that requires only a modicum of reflection to realize, I'm afraid that the kindergarten conversation must occur, because without it nothing useful could be done to overturn these disgusting laws. Conference Report says it's a platitude to say that human rights are non-negotiable, something that I said in my video. Illustrating the point, he says, and I quote, "The freedom of me to swing my fist ends at the point of another person's chin." I don't really understand what Conference Report is talking about, but clearly we have a different conception of human rights and are not talking about the same thing. In all the reading I have ever done on the subject, I have never read one writer argue that, excepting for self-defense, assaulting people was an arguable basic human right, one that was on par with, say, freedom of speech or owning one's own body. I think that Conference Report might be confusing natural rights with acting on any conceivable impulse in a state of nature. If so, I can only say those are different topics, so I am not sure I get Conference Report's point. Conference Report also mentions my videos Prostitution and Reluctance and Reflections on the Swedish Model. He says that some assertions I made in those videos contradict assertions I made in my video Rights are Fundamental. I'm not sure I understand how the conflict and reluctance I expressed in Prostitution and Reluctance contradicts my claim in Rights are Fundamental that a fundamental human right is ownership of one's own body, and that has clear ramifications for the legalization of prostitution. I especially don't see the contradiction, since I clearly said in both Prostitution and Reluctance and in Reflections on the Swedish Model that the ownership of one's own body entails that prostitution should be legal. So in the 3 videos I've done on prostitution, I've held the same position. Since when is consistency a contradiction? Conference Report points out in my discussions in Prostitution and Reluctance and Reflections on the Swedish Model about how an inequality in the distribution of wealth drives many people into prostitution, and that an equitable distribution of wealth might cause the profession of prostitution to largely dissolve. Okay, I said that, but so what? How does any of that negate or in any way problematize my claim that owning your own body is a human right, and that means prostitution should be legal? If there were an equitable distribution of wealth, owning your own body would still be a fundamental human right, and consequently, prostitution should still be legal. So I don't see the conflict in my positions, and I don't get his point. I also don't see how, as Conference Report claims, my praise for Terry's strange antique lens contradicts my position that a fundamental human right is ownership of one's own body, and consequently prostitution should be legalized. I realize that Terry's strange and antique lens differ from me on this matter. Does that mean I am supposed to dislike them and not appreciate their intellects and their passion for their positions? I also praise and respect Luddite Romantic and exchange many private messages with him, even though we disagree on a variety of matters, the legalization of prostitution being one of them. Conference Report, I disagree with you on some matters, but I appreciate the scope of your intellect, your ability to speak knowledgeably and insightfully about a variety of matters, your evident abilities as a teacher and communicator of ideas. I learn from you. Am I not supposed to appreciate all those qualities about you because I disagree with you on some matters? I'm sorry, but I don't get your point here. Conference Report also says that I am, quote, trying to undermine people's views by making assumptions about their psychology, end of quote. I hope Conference Report can appreciate my sense of irony about the statement he's made, since it makes an assumption about my psychology, my motives, when I draw conclusions about people's motives. Of course, as Conference Report knows, I discuss this in detail in my video, Diagnosing Arguments, a video in which I made several arguments, all of which Conference Report ignored when he responded to it in his video, Scared Sick, by referencing only one word I used only one time in that video, the word safe. It's a bit perplexing to me how Conference Report can hold forth the proposition that conversation is fundamental when he can carry on a conversation by taking the most marginal reading possible of his conversant's words while ignoring his substantial points. Be that as it may, I will happily confess that once I have determined that a person's position is indefensible on rational or evidential grounds, I still try to find something interesting and illuminating about why they hold their position and in how they argue for it, namely, what is probably motivating it. Perhaps someone needs to disabuse me of the frequently confirmed observation that often human behavior is motivated. In any case, I try to use a standard that is similar to the one used in jurisprudence for determining motivation, namely, what would be the predictable consequence or consequences if their position were instantiated or if their arguments prevailed. And when it comes to the issue of legalizing prostitution, the predictable consequence is trippingly obvious. The position and arguments of the opponents of legalization would effectively wrest ownership of a woman's body away from a woman. Excuse me, but I don't get why I shouldn't find that to be morally reprehensible. Thank you.